This content presents World War II historical events for educational purposes only, based on documented records to honor those who served and provide historical insight. This does not glorify violence, promote hatred, or spread misinformation. Viewer discretion advised.
The snow falls warm over the Polish fields as I march through frozen mud. My lungs burn with the cutting cold of January 1945, and each breath reminds me that I am still alive when so many have ceased to be. The distant gunfire echoes through desolate forests, but there is a different silence here, a silence that is not peace, but rather the complete absence of sound where life should be. My comrades beside me walk with faces covered by a fear that even war could not prepare us for, because we know we are approaching something that transcends even the horrors we have already witnessed. The barbed wire fences appear first, almost ghostly through the icy mist. I see the main gate in the distance, that iron structure that would become the symbol of everything that represents industrialized evil, and I feel my heart decelerate, as if refusing to accept what my eyes perceive. The guards in the towers are already gone, leaving only the empty framework of a power that was absolute just recently. There is no resistance as we enter, only the sound of our boots breaking the ice beneath our feet. When I finally pass through the main gate, everything inside me freezes in a way that winter could never accomplish. The barracks line up in infinite rows, and even in ruin, they carry a monumentality of suffering that is practically palpable. My weapon, which I have carried for years as an extension of my arm, suddenly seems insignificant before the scale of what I see. I understand in that moment, without need for explanation, that I am not here as a soldier or as an agent of war, but as a witness to something humanity should never have allowed itself to create. The barracks are semi-empty. Some people still remain, huddled in corners, unable to believe that liberation has come. Their eyes, when they meet mine, carry a distrust so deep that I realize that for them, uniforms still mean danger. How can I explain that I come to free them when they have been taught to fear men like me? How can I be the savior when I wear the same uniform as the executioners who tortured them? These questions burn in my mind as I advance cautiously, with open hands, in a gesture of peace that sounds too absurd to be true. I direct my observation camera toward the structures around, searching for signs of life, any signal that there are still people here who need help. What I see in the optical records takes my breath away. Piles of clothes, hair cut into mounds, and in a separate structure. Through the glass, I can glimpse furnaces that still exhale a phantasmagorical heat. My eyes do not want to believe. My brain refuses to process. But my soldier instincts already know too much, already understand more than any human being should have to understand. This place is not just a prison. This place is a masked grave that still breathes. I walk among the barracks and notice the names, the numbers, the markings on the walls. Each of them represents a life, a story, a future that was brutally interrupted. I see children's drawings in some barracks, images of houses and families that would never be reunited, and I feel a rage inside me that I did not know was possible to experience with such intensity. I am trained to kill, to act without questioning, but this place challenges even my ability to understand what it means to be a soldier. The children who made these drawings are all dead, and none of their executioners are here to answer for their crimes. A woman approaches me, her eyes too large for her skeletal face, her skin translucent, revealing every detail of her bones. She whispers something in Polish that I do not understand, but I extend my hand, and she recoils, still afraid. Her fear affects me more than any wound I have ever received, because I realize that liberation is not simply opening a gate. Liberation is a process of rebuilding trust. It is the slow and painful work of helping someone believe again that there are good people in the world. I leave food on the ground, a ration from my military kit, and retreat slowly, allowing her to make her own decision about whether to accept me or not, more soldiers arrive, and we begin to document everything we see. There are cameras capturing images, there are reports being made, there are officers assessing the situation. But all of this seems like an empty ritual before the magnitude of the horror. The numbers I hear mentioned, hundreds of thousands dead, millions missing, cannot be translated in my mind as real concepts. Statistics are abstractions. But when you see the faces, when you smell the stench of death and neglect that permeates every centimeter of this place, abstraction becomes concrete and devastating reality. I find a small diary, almost completely deteriorated by time and humidity. Its pages are practically illegible, but I can distinguish dates and attempts to record moments of joy in a place that was designed to destroy any sign of it. Someone documented their life here. Someone tried to keep their humanity alive through words written in secret. I keep this diary in my uniform, close to my heart, because I feel that this object is a responsibility that will fall upon my shoulders for the rest of my life. Someone needs to tell this story. Someone needs to make sure that the entire world knows that this happened. As evening falls, I sit outside one of the barracks and realize that I cannot cry despite the magnitude of what I have witnessed. My body is so full of adrenaline and trauma that tears cannot come. It is as if I am frozen, not just by the European cold, but by something much deeper, an emotional crystallization that may never completely thaw. Some of my comrades around me are also silent, each processing their own version of this horror, each carrying their own weight as a witness. When we are led to see the gas chamber, my instinct is to refuse. Part of me knows that seeing this will haunt me forever, but even greater is my duty to witness. My duty not to look away when evil presents itself so shamelessly. The guards who remain here, those who were captured or chose not to flee, face our interrogations with an apathy that is even more terrifying than any enthusiastic confession would be. They followed orders, they say. They were just doing their job, as if humanity could be discarded so easily behind the mask of obedience. What I see inside the gas chamber defies description. My military training did not prepare me for this. Nothing could prepare any sensible human being for this. The marks on the walls, possibly from desperate fingernails, trying anything, any hope, any illusion of escape. The smell still remains, a smell that penetrates your clothes, your skin, your lungs, your very essence, to the point where you wonder if you will ever be able to rid yourself of it. I photograph everything because military reports must be visual documents. But each click of the camera feels like a profanation, as if I am transforming death into data, as if numbers could somehow contain the weight of what happened here. The commandant's records lie scattered, and I read details of industrial murder refined to a science. Capacity logs, schedule, reports, efficiency metrics, all documenting the systematic annihilation of human beings with the precision of factory production. I feel my hands tremble as I hold these papers, because they represent a choice made by human minds to perfect the mechanics of genocide. This was not chaos. This was not the fog of war. This was deliberate, calculated, and methodical. The very infrastructure of evil is documented in these files, and the knowledge of it settles into my bones like a cold that will never fully leave me. I find a wall where prisoners have scratched their names, desperate to leave some evidence that they existed, that they mattered, that they should not be forgotten. Some names are complete, others fade into a... I trace my fingers over these inscriptions, feeling the grooves worn by desperate fingernails, and I make a silent promise to each of these names that I will not let the world forget. I will not let history abstract away their suffering into statistics. Each name here represents a person, a soul, a universe of experiences and relationships and dreams that were violently extinguished. The documentation process becomes more than procedure. It becomes sacred duty. I carefully photograph every wall, every mark, every piece of evidence that this darkness existed. Future generations must not be able to deny this. Future generations must not be able to claim ignorance. The weight of this responsibility transforms me in ways I cannot articulate. But I know that the man who entered this place and the man who will walk out are not the same. Something fundamental has shifted in my understanding of what humanity is capable of, both in its capacity for evil and in its obligation to bear witness against it. Among the survivors, I encounter a man who was imprisoned here for 3 years. His name is Jacob, and he speaks to me in broken German about what he has endured. His voice is hollow, as if it comes from very far away, from some deep place inside himself where his consciousness retreated to survive the unspeakable. He tells me of selections where families were separated in seconds, of watching people he knew disappear into the smoke, of learning to suppress every human emotion to avoid drawing the attention of guards who used cruelty as entertainment. As he speaks, I realize that survival here was not a matter of luck, but of developing a psychological armor so thick that it may never fully come off again. Jacob shows me where he carved a calendar into the wall of his barrack. Day after day, month after month, a visual representation of time passing that he desperately needed to maintain his grip on reality. In places like this, where time seems to stop and become meaningless, maintaining connection to the passage of days was an act of resistance. Each mark was a small defiance, a refusal to let this place completely annihilate his sense of self. I photograph this calendar because it represents the human spirit's determination to maintain connection to identity even when identity itself is being systematically erased. He tells me about the music. Yes, there was music here. Prisoners were forced to play instruments while executions took place, while their friends and family members were led to their deaths. The juxtaposition of melody and murder, of art and atrocity, seems almost deliberately designed to destroy the human soul in every possible dimension. Jacob had to listen to these same songs hundreds of times, and he says he will never be able to hear music again without being transported back to this place, without feeling the same helplessness and horror. Culture itself has become weaponized against him. The physical manifestations of trauma are visible on every survivor I encounter. Their bodies are skeletal, yes, but worse is the absence of something in their eyes, something fundamental that the systematic starvation and brutality was designed to extract. Yet some still reach out with what remains of their hands. Some still attempt connection, despite everything that has been done to make connection impossible. This persistence in the face of every force designed to eliminate it represents something almost spiritual, a refusal to let the architects of this place achieve their ultimate goal, the complete erasure of human dignity. I ask Jacob why he is still alive when so many others are not, and he looks at me with an expression that contains both infinite sadness and absolute clarity. He says he does not know that the selection processes seemed almost random, that survival often came down to which line you stood in that day. Who was supervising whether you contracted typhus or dysentery at the exact moment that would have made you worthless as labor? The arbitrariness of it is almost as cruel as the systematic murder, because it means that so many lives could have been saved. So many futures could still exist, if only the choices had been different. The weight of living when others did not is written across his face. In the administrative buildings, I discovered the bureaucratic apparatus that supported this genocide. Meticulous lists, names carefully recorded, destinations noted, dates of arrival and dates of death, or rather, dates when prisoners simply stopped existing in their records. Someone created this system. Someone maintained it. Someone perfected it with the attention to detail, usually reserved for businesses attempting to maximize profit. The irony is sickening. Human beings were processed through this system with the same mechanical precision applied to manufacturing goods, and the paperwork remains. Evidence of the fact that this was not hidden, this was not secret, this was administered with the confidence of legality. I find photographs taken by the perpetrators themselves, images of people who worked here, who lived here, who committed these crimes. They smiled at the camera. They pose with casual indifference. They photographed themselves in front of the crematorium as if they were tourists at a monument. These images are perhaps more terrifying than the documentation of murder because they prove that ordinariness and evil are not opposites. Evil can wear the face of someone who looks just like anyone else, who smiles just like anyone else, who lived a life with friends and hobbies and moments of lightness between the horrors they committed. This ordinariness is what makes it truly nightmarish. The scale becomes increasingly clear through documents, ash records, numbers of bodies processed, efficiency reports on the crematorium capacity. The industrial infrastructure for death becomes visible. And I understand that this was not the work of a small group of fanatics, but rather a massive bureaucratic machine that required thousands of people making incremental choices, following orders, not questioning the system. Most perpetrators were not monsters in appearance. They were administrators and technicians and supervisors doing their jobs. This distributed responsibility makes prosecution difficult, but it also makes it clear that atrocities on this scale require the complicity of ordinary systems and ordinary people. Medical experiments, documentation also remains, and I cannot force myself to read all of it. The descriptions are too specific. The suffering too deliberately inflicted by people who called themselves doctors. The violation of every principle that medicine is supposed to represent is laid bare in these files. These experiments had no scientific value. They were pure sadism, dressed in the language of research. The fact that some of these perpetrators would evade justice, would hide in other countries, would die of old age in comfort, is something that fills me with a rage that has no productive outlet. I compile all of this documentation into reports, translating the horror into military language that somehow makes it more bearable to process. Numbers and statistics and administrative categories. But I know that the real story cannot be contained in reports. The real story lives in the faces I've seen, the silence of the survivors, the weight of the names on the walls. The documentation is necessary, but it is also profoundly insufficient. How do you translate into words the spiritual death of a place, the way evil can seep into the earth itself? By the time I finish recording these details, the sun is setting over Auschwitz, and I think about all the sunsets this place has witnessed, all the people who watched their final sunsets from behind barbed wire, unaware that they were seeing light for the last time. The world kept turning, the sun kept rising and setting. Seasons changed, and all of it was indifferent to the human suffering contained in this small corner of Poland. The vastness of the universe becomes apparent in a moment like this, and so does the importance of bearing witness, of refusing to let suffering disappear into silence. Among the remnants of the children's section, I find drawings that have been preserved, either by chance or by someone who understood their importance. Childish sketches of homes, of gardens, of normal life, that these children would never experience. Some drawings show families, mothers, fathers, siblings, people. These children were torn from in moments that lasted only seconds at the moment of arrival. Other drawings show trains, and I understand that these children were documenting their own trauma, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible through art. One drawing in particular stops me cold. A child has drawn a figure that appears to be themselves, smaller than everything around them, surrounded by shapes that could be interpreted as doors or boxers. Above the figure, in shaky letters that revealed the hand of a child learning to write, are words I cannot read but can imagine: hope, fear, confusion, the simple human attempt to communicate inner experience. This drawing was likely made in the last days of this child's life, and I will never know if this small artist was killed in the chambers, worked to death in the camps, or perhaps even survived to draw again. The uncertainty is its own form of torture. The clothing section contains children's shoes, hundreds of them, thousands of them, each one representing a child now erased from existence. I picked one up, a small red shoe with a broken strap, and cannot stop looking at it. This shoe once protected the feet of a child, carried them through their short life. Perhaps was beloved because of its color or fit. Now it is empty, will always remain empty, and its owner will never take another step anywhere. The mundanity of the object, combined with its devastating implications, nearly breaks my ability to continue bearing witness. I learned from the survivors that the children were sometimes given special treatment at arrival. They were not immediately sent to the chambers, but were instead used for experiments or kept as long as they could work. The logic of evil here developed its own calculus of suffering, with different death sentences assigned based on perceived utility. Children considered too young to work or too damaged from malnutrition or disease went directly to the chambers. Others were kept alive to suffer longer, to provide data for experiments, to serve whatever twisted purpose occurred to their captors. The variety of suffering inflicted demonstrates a sustained creative cruelty that is almost incomprehensible. The absence of children's voices becomes the loudest sound in this place. All the laughter that should have echoed across playgrounds, all the crying that should have been soothed by mothers, all the questions and wonder and simple joys of childhood, all of it silenced permanently. Walking through areas where children lived and died, I begin to understand that this is perhaps the ultimate evil, not just death, but the erasure of future generations, the deliberate prevention of potential lives, the murder of possibilities. Every child here represented an entire world of what could have been, and all of those worlds were systematically destroyed. As we prepare to leave Auschwitz, I carry with me the diary I found earlier, Jacob's account of survival, photographs of the walls with names scratched in desperation, and a weight that I understand now will never fully leave my shoulders. I am no longer simply a soldier returning from combat. I am a bearer of witness to something that demands to be remembered, that demands to be prevented from ever happening again. The liberation of this place is only the beginning. The real work is ensuring that humanity learns from what occurred here, that the world never forgets what happens when hatred is systematized and dehumanization becomes policy. I think about the perpetrators who will attempt to escape justice, who will claim orders and obedience, who will try to portray themselves as victims of a system. And I think about how I must speak against this inevitable revisionism, how I must ensure that the agency and choice of the criminals is not erased even as they attempt to hide behind bureaucratic distance. The liberation of Auschwitz means nothing if we allow the lessons to be forgotten, if we permit the narrative to be shaped by the apologetics of the guilty. My responsibility extends beyond today, beyond this war. It extends into the future and demands that I remain a voice for those who can no longer speak. The survivors will carry trauma that no medicine can fully cure, that no amount of time will completely erase. Some will rebuild lives, find love, create families, and find meaning in continuation despite everything. Others will struggle with the psychological weight for the rest of their existence, will wake from nightmares, will see the smoke still rising from chambers that no longer burn. For all of them, the world has been irrevocably altered, and they must now navigate an existence defined by what humanity did to them. My commitment is to honor their suffering not through pity or sentimentality, but through relentless insistence on truth, and through my work to ensure that the perpetrators are brought to justice. I look back one final time as I walk away from Auschwitz at the barbed wire that still stands, at the structures that still carry the weight of unimaginable evil. The liberation is complete in a literal sense. The gates are open, the prisoners are free. But liberation in its fullest sense is something that will take generations to achieve. It requires a world that confronts this history unflinchingly, that builds memorials not to glorify but to warn, that educates future generations about how ordinary people participated the extraordinary evil. It requires a commitment to justice that does not end when the war ends, but rather begins in earnest when we must decide what kind of world we will build from the ashes. The story of Auschwitz is a story that belongs to all of humanity, not because all of humanity committed these crimes, but because all of humanity is responsible for ensuring they do not happen again. This is the true meaning of liberation, not just freedom from immediate oppression, but the collective commitment to a future where such places cannot exist, where such systems cannot be erected, where such hatred cannot be systematized into policy. As I carry this burden forward, I do so with the understanding that silence is complicity, that forgetting is betrayal, and that bearing witness is both a sacred obligation and the only meaningful response I can offer to those whose voices have been stolen. The work continues in ways I cannot yet fully imagine. Perhaps I will write about what I have seen. Perhaps I will testify at trials. Perhaps I will simply live my life carrying this knowledge and sharing it when the moment demands. But in all of it, I will remember the faces of survivors, the names on the walls, the small red child's shoe, Jacob's hollow voice, the drawings of homes that were never reached, the systematic precision of bureaucratic murder. These memories are my burden and my responsibility, and I will not put them down. If you've witnessed this story, you now carry a responsibility as well. Learn about the Holocaust in depth, not merely as a historical event, but as a mirror held up to humanity's capacity for evil. Educate others, visit memorials, support organizations dedicated to Holocaust remembrance and education. Most importantly, recognize the warning signs in our present world. The dehumanizing language, the systematic scapegoating, the incremental erosion of rights, the machinery of bureaucratic indifference. Auschwitz was not inevitable. It was built step by step by ordinary people making choices. The choice to prevent future atrocities rests with us in this moment, in the decisions we make every day about what we will tolerate and what we will resist. Remember their names, speak their stories, build a future worthy of those who did not survive to see it.